From August to October 1972, Lee began work on his fourth Golden Harvest film, Game of Death. He began filming some scenes, including his fight sequence with 7FT2 in 218 p.m. American basketball star Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, a former student. Production stopped in November 1972, when Warner Brothers offered Lee the opportunity to star in Enter the Dragon, the first film to be produced jointly by Concord, Golden Harvest, and Warner Brothers. Filming began in Hong Kong in February 1973 and was completed in April 1973. 1 month into the filming, another production company, Starseas Motion Pictures, promoted Lee as a leading actor in Fist of Unicorn, although he had merely agreed to choreograph the fight sequences in the film as a favor to his longtime friend, Unicorn Chan. Lee planned to sue the production company, but retained his friendship with Chan 90. However, only a few months after the completion of Enter the Dragon, and 6 days before its July 26, 1973 release, Lee died. Enter the Dragon went on to become one of the year's highest-grossing films and cemented Lee as a martial arts legend. It was made for USD $150,000 in 1973, the equivalent of $4 million adjusted for inflation as of 2007. Enter the Dragon is estimated to have grossed over $400 million worldwide, the equivalent of over $2 billion adjusted for inflation as of 2022. The film sparked a brief fad in martial arts, epitomized in songs such as Kung Fu Fighting and some TV shows. 1978, present. Posthumous work. Robert Clouse, the director of Enter the Dragon, together with Golden Harvest, revived Lee's unfinished film, Game of Death. Lee had shot over 100 minutes of footage, including outtakes, for Game of Death before shooting was stopped to allow him to work on Enter the Dragon. In addition to Abdul-Jabbar, George Lazenby, Hapkido master Ji Han-jae, and another of Lee's students, Dan Inosanto, appeared in the film, which culminated in Lee's character, Hai Tian, clad in a yellow tracksuit, taking on a series of different challengers on each floor as they make their way through a 5-level pagoda. In a controversial move, Robert Clouse finished the film using a Lee lookalike, Kim Tai-chung, with Yuan Biao as a stunt double, and archive footage of Lee from his other films with a new storyline and cast. It was released in 1978. The cobbled-together film contained only 15 minutes of actual footage of Lee. The unused footage Lee had filmed was recovered 22 years later and included in the documentary Bruce Lee, A Warrior's Journey. In 1972, after the success of The Big Boss and Fist of Fury, a third film was planned by Raymond Chow at Golden Harvest to be directed by Lo Wei Tiger. However, at the time, Lee decided to direct and produce his script for Way of the Dragon instead. Although Lee had formed a production company with Raymond Chow, a period film was also planned from September-November 1973, with the competing Shaw Brothers studio to be directed by either Cho Yuen or Cheng Kang, and written by Yi Kang and Cheng Kei, titled The Seven Sons of the Jade Dragon. In 2015, Perfect Storm Entertainment and Bruce Lee's daughter Shannon Lee announced that the series The Warrior would be produced and would air on Cinemax. Filmmaker Justin Lin was chosen to direct the series. Production began in October 2017 in Cape Town, South Africa. The first season has 10 episodes. In April 2019, Cinemax renewed the series for a second season. In March 2021, it was announced that producer Jason Kothari had acquired the rights to The Silent Flute to become a miniseries, which would have John Fuso as a screenwriter and executive producer. Unproduced works, Lee had also worked on several scripts himself. A tape containing a recording of Lee narrating the basic storyline to a film tentatively titled Southern Fists/Northern Leg exists. showing some similarities with the canned script for the silent flute, Circle of Iron. Another script had the title Green Bamboo Warrior, set in San Francisco, planned to co-star Bolo Young and to be produced by Andrew Vodna. Photoshoot costume tests were organized for some of these planned film projects. Martial arts and fitness. Further information. Jeet Kune Do style. Jeet Kune Do, founder. Chinese martial arts. Wing Chun, Tai Chi. Boxing. Street fighting. Judo. Taekwondo. Karate. Wrestling. Arnis. Epee fencing, Hapkido, various other styles, by personal tutoring and research. Dan Inyoshanto, Fred Sato, and Jean Labelle, Koranis. Notable students: Jesse Glover, James DeMille, Linda Lee Cadwell, Dan Inosanto, Taki Kimura, Ted Wong, James Yem Lee, Joe Lewis, Jun Rhee, Mike Stone, Jean Labelle, Chuck Norris, Roman Polanski, Sharon Tate, James Coburn, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Brandon Lee. Others, Lee's films are known for popularizing the sidekick, roundhouse kick, grappling, spinning heel kick, and his distinctive Chi Kellner. Lee was also known for popularizing the 1-inch punch and the 2-finger push-up. Striking. Lee's first introduction to martial arts was through his father, from whom he learned the fundamentals of Wu-style Tai Chi. In his teens, Lee became involved in Hong Kong gang conflicts, which led to frequent street fights. The largest influence on Lee's martial arts development was his study of Wing Chun. Lee was 16 years old under the Wing Chun teacher Ip Man between late 1956 and 1957, after losing to rival gang members. Ip's regular classes generally consisted of form practice, chi sao, drills, wooden dummy techniques, and free sparring. There was no set pattern for the classes. Other Chinese martial arts styles Lee trained in were Northern Praying Mantis, Southern Praying Mantis, Eagle Claw, Tan Tu, La Hong, Mizongi, Wa Ong, Monkey, Southern Dragon, Fujian White Crane, Choi Li Fut, Hungar, Choyar, Futgar, Molkar, Yao Kungmun, Ligar, and Lao Gar. Lee was trained in boxing between 1956 and 1958 by Brother Edward, coach of the St. Francis Xavier's College boxing team. Lee went on to win the Hong Kong Schools boxing tournament in 1958, while scoring knockdowns against the previous champion Gary Elms in the final. After moving to the United States, Lee was heavily influenced by heavyweight boxing champion Muhammad Ali, whose footwork he studied and incorporated into his style in the 1960s. Lee demonstrated his Jeet Kune Do martial arts at the Long Beach International Karate Championships in 1964 and 1968, with the latter having higher quality video footage available. Lee is seen demonstrating quick eye strikes before his opponent can block, and demonstrating the 1-inch punch on several volunteers. He demonstrates Chi Sao drills while blindfolded against an opponent, probing for weaknesses and takedowns. Lee then participates in a full encounter sparring bout against an opponent with both wearing leather headgear. Lee is seen implementing his Jeet Kune Do concept of economical motion, using Ali-inspired footwork to keep out of range while counter-attacking with back fists and straight punches. He halts attacks with stop-hit side kicks and quickly executes several sweeps and head kicks. The opponent repeatedly attempts to attack Lee, but is never able to connect with a clean hit. He once managed to come close with a spin kick, but Lee counters it. The footage was reviewed by Black Belt magazine in 1995, concluding that the action is as fast and furious as anything in Lee's films. It was at the 1964 championships that Lee first met Taekwondo master Jung Rhee. While Rhee taught Lee the sidekick in detail, Lee taught Ri the non-telegraphic punch. Ri learned what he calls the acupunch from Lee and incorporated it into American Taekwondo. Is a rapid fast punch that is very difficult to block based on human reaction time. The idea is to finish the execution of the punch before the opponent can complete the brain-to-wrist communication. Lee commonly used the oblique kick, made popular much later in mixed martial arts. It is called the jeet tek, stop kick, or intercepting kick in Jeet Kune Do. Grappling. Lee favored cross-training between different fighting styles and had a particular interest in grappling. Lee trained with several judo practitioners in Seattle and California, among them Fred Sato, Jesse Glover, Taki Kimura, Hayward Nishioka, and Wally J., as well as Jean LaBelle. Many of his first students were proficient in judo and other arts, and he learned as much as he taught. After befriending Lee Bell on the set of The Green Hornet, Lee offered to teach him striking arts in exchange for being taught grappling techniques. Lee Bell had been taught catch wrestling by prestigious grapplers Lou Taze and Ed Lewis, and notable techniques of both judo and catch wrestling can be seen in Lee's Tao of Jeet Kune Do. He also learned grappling moves from Hapkido and Hao Nya Ha Nu Ho. According to Glover, Lee only found judo ineffective at the action of getting hold of the opponent. In their first training together, Glover showed Lee an Osoto Gari, which Lee considered not a bad technique, but he disliked that Glover had needed to hold on to Lee. While in Seattle, Lee developed anti-grappling techniques against opponents trying to tackle him or take him to the ground. Glover recalled, Lee definitely would not go to the ground if he had the opportunity to get you standing up. Nonetheless, Lee expressed to LaBelle a wish to integrate judo into his fighting style. He incorporated the Osoto Gari into Jeet Kune Do, among other throws, arm locks, and chokeholds from judo. Although Lee opined that grappling was of little use in action choreography because it was not visually distinctive, he showcased grappling moves in his films, such as Way of the Dragon, where his character finishes his opponent Chuck Norris with a neck hold inspired by LaBelle, and Enter the Dragon, whose prologue features Lee submitting his opponent Sammo Hung with an armbar. Game of Death also features Lee and Hanjae exchanging grappling moves, as well as Lee using wrestling against the character played by Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Lee was also influenced by the training routine of the Great Gama, an Indian/Pakistani Pahlavani wrestling champion known for his grappling strength. Lee incorporated Gama's exercises into his training routine, street fighting. Another major influence on Lee was Hong Kong's street fighting culture in the form of rooftop fights. In the mid-20th century, soaring crime in Hong Kong, combined with limited Hong Kong police manpower, led to many young Hong Kongers learning martial arts for self-defense. Around the 1960s, there were about 400 martial arts schools in Hong Kong, teaching their distinctive styles of martial arts. In Hong Kong's street fighting culture, there emerged a rooftop fight scene in the 1950s and 1960s, where gangs from rival martial arts schools challenged each other to bare-knuckle fights on Hong Kong's rooftops to avoid crackdowns by British colonial authorities. Lee frequently participated in these Hong Kong rooftop fights. He combined different techniques from different martial arts schools into his own hybrid martial arts style. When Lee returned to Hong Kong in the early 1970s, his reputation as the fastest fist in the East routinely led to locals challenging him to street fights. He sometimes accepted these challenges and engaged in street fights, which led to some criticism from the press portraying him as violent at the time. Fitness. At 172 p.m. and weighing 64K, Lee was renowned for his physical fitness and vigor, achieved by using a dedicated fitness regimen to become as strong as possible. After his match with Wong Jackman in 1965, Lee changed his approach toward martial arts training. Lee felt that many martial artists of his time did not spend enough time on physical conditioning. Lee included all elements of total fitness: muscular strength, muscular endurance, cardiovascular endurance, and flexibility. He used traditional bodybuilding techniques to build some muscle mass, though not overdone, as that could decrease speed or flexibility. At the same time, concerning balance, Lee maintained that mental and spiritual preparation are fundamental to the success of physical training and martial arts skills. In Tao of Jeet Kune Do, he wrote, "Training is one of the most neglected phases of athletics. Too much time is given to the development of skill and too little to the development of the individual for participation. JKD ultimately is not a matter of petty techniques, but of highly developed spirituality and physique." According to Linda Lee Cadwell, soon after he moved to the United States, Lee started to take nutrition seriously and developed an interest in health foods, high-protein drinks, and vitamin and mineral supplements. He later concluded that achieving a high-performance body was akin to maintaining the engine of a high-performance automobile. Allegorically, as one could not keep a car running on low-octane fuels, one could not sustain one's body with a steady diet of junk food, and with the wrong fuel, one's body would perform sluggishly or sloppily. Lee avoided baked goods and refined flour, describing them as providing empty calories that did nothing for his body. He was known for being a fan of Asian cuisine for its variety, and often ate meals with a combination of vegetables, rice, and fish. Lee had a dislike for dairy products and as a result used powdered milk in his diet. Dan Inosanto recalls Lee practicing meditation as the first action on his schedule. Artistry, philosophy. While best known as a martial artist, Lee studied drama and Asian and Western philosophy, starting while a student at the University of Washington. He was well-read and had an extensive library dominated by martial arts subjects and philosophical texts. His books on martial arts and fighting philosophy are known for their philosophical assertions, both inside and outside of martial arts circles. His eclectic philosophy often mirrored his fighting beliefs, though he was quick to say that his martial arts were solely a metaphor for such teachings. He believed that any knowledge ultimately led to self-knowledge. He said that his chosen method of self-expression was martial arts. His influences include Taoism, Jiddu Krishnamurti, and Buddhism. Lee's philosophy was very much in opposition to the conservative worldview advocated by Confucianism. John Little states that Lee was an atheist. When asked in 1972 about his religious affiliation, he replied, "None whatsoever." When asked if he believed in God, he said, "To be perfectly frank, I really do not." Poetry. Aside from martial arts and philosophy, which focus on the physical aspect and self-consciousness for truths and principles, Lee also wrote poetry that reflected his emotions and a stage in his life collectively. Many forms of art remain concordant with the artist creating them. Lee's principle of self-expression was applied to his poetry as well. His daughter Shannon Lee said, "He did write poetry. He was really the consummate artist." His poetic works were originally handwritten on paper, then later on edited and published, with John Little being the major author, quotes, for Bruce Lee's works. Linda Lee Cadwell, Bruce Lee's wife, shared her husband's notes, poems, and experiences with followers. She mentioned, "Lee's poems are, by American standards, rather dark, reflecting the deeper, less exposed recesses of the human psyche." Most of Bruce Lee's poems are categorized as anti-poetry or fall into a paradox. The mood in his poems shows the side of the man that can be compared with other poets such as Robert Frost, one of many well-known poets expressing himself with dark poetic works. The paradox, taken from the yin and yang symbol in martial arts, was also integrated into his poetry. His martial arts and philosophy contribute a great part to his poetry. The free verse form of Lee's poetry reflects his, quote, "be formless, shapeless, like water." Personal life. Names. Li's Cantonese birth name was Li Jun Fan. The name homophonically means return again, and was given to Li by his mother, who felt he would return to the United States once he came of age. Because of his mother's superstitious nature, she had originally named him Saifan, which is a feminine name meaning small phoenix. The English name Bruce is thought to have been given by the hospital's attending physician, Dr. Mary Glover. Li had 3 other Chinese names: Li Yuancham, a family name; Li Yuankam, which he used as a student name while he was attending LaSalle College, and his Chinese screen name, Li Sulong. Sulong means little dragon. Li's given name, Junfan, was originally written in Chinese. However, the Jun Chinese character was identical to part of his grandfather's name, Li Junbu. Hence, the Chinese character for Jun in Li's name was changed to the homonym instead, to avoid naming taboo in Chinese tradition. Family. Li's father, Li Hoi-chun, was one of the leading Cantonese opera and film actors at the time, and was embarking on a year-long opera tour with his family on the eve of the Japanese invasion of Hong Kong. Li Hoi-chun had been touring the United States for many years and performing in numerous Chinese communities there. Although many of his peers decided to stay in the U.S., Li Hoi-chun returned to Hong Kong after Bruce's birth. Within months, Hong Kong was invaded, and the Lis lived for 3 years and 8 months under Japanese occupation. After the war ended, Li Hoi-chun resumed his acting career and became a more popular actor during Hong Kong's rebuilding years. Li's mother, Grace Ho, was from one of the wealthiest and most powerful clans in Hong Kong, the Ho-tungs. She was the half-niece of Sir Robert Ho-tung, the Eurasian patriarch of the clan. As such, the young Bruce Li grew up in an affluent and privileged environment. Despite the advantage of his family's status, the neighborhood in which Li grew up became overcrowded, dangerous, and full of gang rivalries due to an influx of refugees fleeing communist China for Hong Kong, at that time a British Crown colony. Grace Ho is reported as either the adopted or biological daughter of Ho Kam Tung Ho Gum Tung and the half-niece of Sir Robert Ho Kam, both notable Hong Kong businessmen and philanthropists. Bruce was the 4th of 5 children: Phoebe Li, Agnes Li, Peter Li, and Robert Li. Bruce Li with his son Brandon in 1966. Grace's parentage remains unclear. Linda Li, in her 1989 biography, The Bruce Lee Story, suggests that Grace had a German father and was a Catholic. Bruce Thomas, in his 1994 biography, Bruce Lee Fighting Spirit, suggests that Grace had a Chinese mother and a German father. Li's relative, Eric Peter Ho, in his 2010 book, Tracing My Children's Lineage, suggests that Grace was born in Shanghai to a Eurasian woman named Chung King Sing. Eric Peter Ho said that Grace Li was the daughter of a mixed-race Shanghainese woman, and her father was Ho Kam Tung. Grace Li herself reported that her mother was English and her father was Chinese. Grace Li herself reported that her mother was English and her father was Chinese. In the 2018 biography Bruce Lee, A Life, Matthew Polly identifies Li's maternal grandfather as Ho Kong Tong, who had often been reported as his adoptive grandfather. Ho Kong Tong's father, Charles Maurice Bosman, was a Dutch Jewish businessman from Rotterdam. He moved to Hong Kong with the Dutch East India Company and served as the Dutch consul to Hong Kong at one time. He had a Chinese concubine named Ho Kong Tong. Bosman subsequently abandoned his family and emigrated to California. Ho Kong Tong became a wealthy businessman with a wife, 13 concubines, and a British mistress who gave birth to Grace Ho. His younger brother Robert Li Junfai is a musician and singer. He performed in the Hong Kong group The Thunderbirds. A few singles were sung mostly or all in English. Also released was Lee singing a duet with Irene Ryder. Lee Jun-Fai lived with Lee in Los Angeles in the United States and stayed. After Lee's death, Lee Jun-Fai released an album and a single by the same name dedicated to Lee called The Ballad of Bruce Lee. While studying at the University of Washington, he met his future wife Linda Emery, a fellow student studying to become a teacher. As relations between people of different races were still banned in many U.S. states, they married in secret in August 1964. Lee had 2 children with Linda, Brandon 1, 9, 6, 5, 1, 9, 9, 3, and Shannon Lee, born 1969. Upon Lee passing in 1973, she continued to promote Bruce Lee's martial art Jeet Kune Do. She wrote the 1975 book Bruce Lee, The Man Only I Knew, on which the 1993 feature film Dragon, the Bruce Lee story, was based. In 1989, she wrote the book The Bruce Lee Story. She retired in 2001 from the family estate. Lee died when his son Brandon was 8 years old. While alive, Lee taught Brandon martial arts and would invite him to visit sets. This gave Brandon the desire to act, and he went on to study the craft. As a young adult, Brandon Lee found some success acting in action-oriented pictures such as Legacy of Rage, 1986, Showdown in 1981, and Rapid Fire, 1992. In 1993, at the age of 28, Brandon Lee died after being accidentally shot by a prop gun on the set of The Crow. Lee died when his daughter Shannon was 4. In her youth, she studied Jeet Kune Do under Richard Bustillo, one of her father's studies. However, her serious studies did not begin until the late 1990s. To train for parts in action movies, she studied Jeet Kune Do with Ted Wong. Friends, students, and contemporaries, Lee's brother Robert with his friends Taki Kimura, Dan Inosanto, Steve McQueen, James Coburn, and Peter Chin were his pallbearers. Coburn was a martial arts student and a friend of Lee. Coburn worked with Lee and Sterling Silliphant on developing the silent flute. Upon Lee's early death, at his funeral, Coburn gave a eulogy. Regarding McQueen, Lee made no secret that he wanted everything McQueen had and would stop at nothing to get it. Inosanto and Kimura were friends and disciples of Lee. Inosanto, who would go on to train Lee's son Brandon. Kimura continued to teach Lee's craft in Seattle. According to Lee's wife, Chin was a lifelong family friend and a student of Lee.